With the rise of hybrid athletes and the popularity of functional training, the question of what constitutes the perfect physique is more relevant than ever. We're not talking about having the prettiest six-pack or the biggest biceps. What we're dealing with here is the pursuit of peak performance, the quest for the human body that would dominate in every situation. If these questions pique your interest, then you're definitely a fitness nerd, and the show Physical 100 was made for you. 100 participants, gathered in the same room, all being put through an intense multidisciplinary gauntlet, with at the end only one remaining: the perfect physique. This is every boy's fantasy. When we're not talking about who'd win in a fight between a gorilla and a grizzly, we're sitting there wondering who'd be the best athlete in an underground tournament situation. Is it the wrestler, the rugby player, perhaps the firefighter? Time to find out. Season 1 of Physical 100 had one major flaw. It didn't put enough emphasis on stamina, allowing poorly conditioned athletes to slip through the cracks. Season 2 fixes that issue, with the first quest being a cardio blast, forcing each contestant to run for their lives. Literally, because at the end of each round, half of the room gets eliminated, so saving your energy for later isn't really an option. Here's where it gets devilish. The room is filled with manual treadmills, which are significantly harder on the body than electric ones, because you're responsible for creating and maintaining your own momentum. Quickly, those with low stamina or coordination fizzle out. You can't claim to have the perfect physique if you gas out after 10 minutes of running. After round 1, half of the contestants are gone. After round 2, only 10 remain. These are your specialists, the ones with the best cardiovascular endurance who never skip leg day. Unsurprisingly, they're all lightweights. No strongman or bodybuilder to see here. These stamina monsters are comprised of crossfitters, rugby and soccer players, MMA fighters, all athlete types that must stay permanently on the move, and for whom having strong hearts and lungs is a necessity. Thankfully for the meatheads of the pack, this was quest 0. No one goes home here, but the higher you place, the earlier you get to pick your opponent in the first official quest, a one-on-one battle to the death. You understand the importance of placing high. A 200-pound male is suddenly in a position to select a female opponent, guaranteeing an easy victory. Unsurprisingly, this didn't occur. In a continuation of Season 1, the men showed great chivalry and were more interested in facing off against strong opponents to prove their worth. That's not to say that no Machiavellian plot took place. Naturally, you also had your fair share of the strong picking on the weak, and the fast picking on the slow, all made possible by the 3 different arenas available for the contestants to pick: a grassy field, a water pit, or an octagon. If you're fast, you'll pick the grass. If you're tough, you'll pick the mud. And if you're an MMA fighter, you'll pick the cage. Now of course, this is still PG-13, so no Conan the Barbarian shenanigans here. Instead, the fighters are battling over the possession of a ball. Whoever is in control at the end wins. While this makes for great cinema, it also functions poorly as a fitness test, the majority of the matches ending with one of the contestants curling on top of the ball until the clock runs out. This display of strength and willpower, although impressive, also completely removes the technical and athletic aspects out of the equation. That is, until a grappler steps in the cage. It was quite striking to see how helpless the average athlete was when it came to using their hips in ground positions, or dismounting an opponent that had passed guard. But the worst was getting to the ball. Often, to force the opponent to let go, they would just pick them up and drop them repeatedly, which is about as effective as trying to crack a coconut by hitting it with a spoon. The grapplers did it completely different. They knew exactly which joint to pick and which lever to apply to force the opponent to release that ball. Truly, Jiu-Jitsu is a sport that cannot be underestimated in ground situations. for it is often the difference between victory and defeat, to the point that even complete female against male mismatches turned out in favor of the weaker competitor as long as they had grappling on their side. Still, this didn't stop the majority of the matches from turning into total bloodbaths, with only half of the competitors surviving. Not necessarily always the strongest ones, but the most cunning. Intelligence is also a factor in survival of the fittest. Such craftiness would prove exceptionally useful in the first team battle, that involves the contestants of each crew making their way through a maze to collect sandbags, that would allow them to conquer certain areas of the map by loading them onto scales. One loading point at the center for 3 scales scattered on each side of the room. More than a physical test, this is a strategical battle. Immediately, the competent leader understands that focusing on all 3 scales is useless. All efforts must be spent on only 2, for that is what is required to win. Then there's the barrel problem. The voice makes a point of announcing the existence of heavy barrels, with several sandbags each. This sounds immediately appealing. After all, the goal is to load up the scales, so the heavier the item the better. But this is a trap. While the barrels are indeed heavier, they're also more voluminous. When it comes to economy of space, they're actually detrimental. This was confirmed later on. Every single team that went for these barrels ended up losing in the end. But good luck thinking about all of this in the heat of the moment, while trying to navigate a shadowy maze with hostile opponents who are after your sandbags. This is by far the best quest out of both seasons. It tests everything. Your strength, as every bag weighs between 15 and 50 pounds, but also your endurance, both mental and physical. Here, you are constantly aware of how many bags the opposing team has in the scale, so you're either fighting to preserve your advantage or battling from behind to catch up. The act of picking up and carrying a bag is an underrated fitness skill in itself. It requires explosive strength as well as strong hips and back to not only hoist that weight up, but also take it to the desired destination. Add to that the fact that past a certain point, the opponents are allowed to bash you into the walls as well as the disorienting nature of a maze, and you have the perfect cocktail to make the unprepared mind crack under pressure. This is the quest that produced the most upsets. No matter how physically dominant your team is, if you don't organize your energy properly, you will be overtaken by a lesser crew. I think the producers of the show are aware of that, because in order to recover those big fishes that got drowned in the maze, they immediately followed it up with a redemption match. One of the most brutal things ever showcased on Physical 100. If you've watched Season 1, you know that the consolation match was an entrance battle to see who would be able to keep their torso propped up in the air the longest. None of that here. Instead, you get a sandpit surrounded by 10 poles, each one etched with a symbol. The rule is simple. Be the one holding onto that symbol at the stop of the clock. By the end of the quest, only one must remain. Now I think is a good time to talk about the elephant in the room. The fact that no woman could possibly win at such a challenge. Oftentimes, when browsing forum posts about Physical 100, I was met with the following sentiment. That the show was too skewed towards displays of strength, which automatically makes it impossible for women to win. This checks out. By this point of the show, the majority of the contestants are men, and the few women that make it to the final rounds only end up there because they got carried by their teams. What is even the point of making it a mixed competition when we already know the scales are rigged? There really is no answer to this question. If the show focused more on balancing acts and displays of finesse, the heavy competitors would be penalized, but women wouldn't necessarily do better, as demonstrated by the results of the monkey bars. This doesn't take away from the heart displayed by these female athletes, who know they're fighting an uphill battle, but give it their all regardless. It does, however, explain why the majority of them stayed far away from these poles. When you have 5 sweaty dudes fighting over them like starved dogs, the last thing you want is to throw yourself in the middle of that cockfight. To be fair, some of the dudes also quickly threw in the towel. When you have a monster like Min-soo Kim wrapped around a pole, surrender appears like an appealing option. And yet, it wasn't the biggest man who won that fight. A name I will keep silent, in case you've yet to watch the show and want to discover it for yourself. Besides that, nothing much to say about this quest. It was a pure matter of strength and martial prowess, with zero teamwork and minimal athleticism required. Something that the following pre-quest event didn't really make up for. That being said, if you're a fitness nerd like myself, you surely got a kick out of it. After all, nothing better to get the blood going than a good old pull-up challenge. Now, if you are expecting crisp bodybuilding pull-ups with perfect form, you'll be disappointed. The goal here is to crank out as many as possible, and the judging criteria are relatively lax. No need to go all the way up or to enter a dead hang at the bottom. Naturally, this is the perfect environment for crossfitters and other fitness acrobats to dominate, and many a keeping pull-up was witnessed in the filming of this event. While I was greatly tempted to call the form police, these technique shenanigans don't take away from the impressive feats of some of these athletes, who are able to bang out sets of 40 in the span of 1 minute. The winning teams got to pick their opponents for the next crew battle, a set piece that more than makes up for the lack of refinement of the past 2 events. Picture an underground mine, with at its center multiple railroads equipped with heavy-duty carts and sandbags weighing upwards of 100 pounds. The goal is simple: transporting the load from one end of the track to the other, the twist being that the total weight to convey is 2 tons. If you get too greedy and overfill your cart, you might be stuck in a situation of being completely unable to move the payload. But if you lack ambition, the other teams are sure to take advantage of it and lap you. This challenge quickly revealed who had trained sled pushers in the past and who hadn't. And unlike what you might think, the heaviest athletes didn't necessarily do the best here. Being big can be an advantage, but the pump can quickly become your enemy if it prevents you from moving your muscles. Players of intermittent sports that favor light heavyweight builds and a mix of strength and endurance had a great advantage here. Save for the first quest, this is a repeat of Season 1. Lots of fighting and picking up stuff, but nothing so far as pure skill goes. But that is when Season 2 takes a turn for the better, starting with the introduction of the monkey bars. The contestants having to race through a suspended parkour while pushing a load with their legs, testing both coordination and upper body / grip strength. If you're a calisthenics athlete, I'm sure you love that one. And you probably tried to imagine yourself attempting that quest. Let's get real, you'd probably get smoked. Just crossing that path alone is no joke, but doing it while racing other pro athletes and having to push that heavy bag in front of you is another thing entirely. The worst being that if you fall, you get to start from the beginning again. It was quite inspiring to see that despite the fierce competition, the participants always had words of encouragement for their opponents. This is probably the best part of the show. Besides the amazing athletic feats, the fitness culture on display in Physical 100 is a true inspiration, and I hope we eventually get a Western version of it. Media plays a huge role in shaping society, and having a show based on self-improvement and collaboration would be a nice change of pace from the self-indulging drivel that passes as entertainment these days. Naturally, some of the athletes are blatantly on steroids, but the ratio is always relatively low, and it's not like they openly promote PED use, which is why I'm personally fine with it. In Physical 100, the perfect physique is not decided by who is the most huge or shredded, but by whose body can surmount every obstacle. Nothing better represents this mindset than the fourth quest, which sees teammates face each other for a spot in the finals. The name roller race might sound cute at first, until you realize that the roller in question is a 300-pound torture contraption strapped to the contestants that they have to carry from one end of the field to the other. And of course, it's not a straight path. That would be too easy. They also threw in a few humps as well as a water ditch to make things more fun. Whoever comes in last is out, until there is only one. This is the perfect final filter. If you're strong enough to pull the roller but lack speed, you're toast. But even if you possess both qualities, you'll still get kicked out if your stamina is lacking. Only the most well-rounded athletes can survive this, as demonstrated by the 4 surviving contestants, who I couldn't help but notice all possess relatively similar body types. All fairly lean with a perfect balance of strength, speed, agility, intelligence, and endurance. Then comes by far my favorite strength challenge of this edition, the infinite squats. 3 contestants, each with a bar set to their height. For each round, they are to complete an unknown number of reps with a given weight. It starts with 100 kgs for 30, then 150 kgs for 40, then 200 kgs for 20, with no end in sight. The first one to give up loses. This is probably the only challenge where a bodybuilder like myself would have a chance to win, especially considering that the type of squat they are doing is significantly easier than a regular barbell one. Unfortunately, despite the height adjustments, short lifters are still at an advantage here, because of the decreased range of motion. But at its heart, this is a pure battle of willpower. Anyone who has attempted the 20 rep squat program knows what I'm talking about. Then comes the final challenge, the ultimate mano a mano that opposes the 2 remaining candidates for the title of Perfect Physique. A pole push that tests the very limit of their strength, endurance, and width. If at first glance this is all brawn, the reality is quite different. This is a matter of physiques and levels, as pushing headfirst into the pole is the surest way to see your efforts turned against you. The lower you can keep your hand off the pole, the higher the opponent's is, forcing their center of gravity upwards and putting you in an advantageous position to push from. As always, figuring these things out in the heat of the moment is easier said than done, but being able to keep a cool head is also part of winning in sports. And thus, the Perfect Physique was decided. I won't tell you who won, as I'd like you to experience this epic moment for yourself. If you're into fitness, I can already tell you you're going to love this show, so go give it a watch. And if you have watched it, please refrain from spoiling the results in the comments. Instead, tell me who your favorite athlete was and why. For me, it was Dong-hyun Kim. There's just something about the swagger of a middle-aged MMA fighter that does it for me. If you enjoyed this video and you had a good time, consider supporting the channel on Ko-fi, first link in the description. Pledging $3 a month might not seem like much to you, but this is what allows me to keep creating content for you guys, so don't hesitate. Thank you for watching, have a good night, and stay 100.